Om Sadashiva-Samarambham Shankaracharya-Madhyamam Asmacharya-Paryantam Vande Guru-Paramparam Om Sahana-Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sah Veeryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Mavidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, so we were still on the fourth mantra of the second chapter. So let us chant that again. Pratibodha viditam matam.
Pratibodha viditam matam.
Amritatvam hi vindate.
Amritatvam hi vindate.
Atmana vindate viryam.
Atmana vindate viryam.
Vidyaya vindate mritam.
Vidyaya vindate mritam.
So we had finished the discussion on the meaning of the mantra, and we were looking at two of the opposing darshanas, and we had just finished one darshana by the darshana's originator is somebody called Bhartra Prapancha. So do you remember the name of the darshana? Hopefully.
Nyaya karma samuchaya.
Jnana karma samuchaya. And Bhartra Prapancha said what? That the consciousness is a karyam, a product of the body, right? So that we had negated, Shankaracharya had negated with his arguments, and now we are looking at the next opposing darshana. The originator is Kanada, and it is called Nayayika Vaisheshika Matam. Remember that in the six darshanas, Nayayika and Vaisheshika are separate darshanas, but they are very, very close to each other. So when any discussion takes place, we combine them. So we are taking this as a combined Nayayika Vaisheshika Matam. And what do they say? They say consciousness is a property of Atma. Okay, Bharata Prapancha said what? It's a product. But here in this Matam, Atma is the noun and consciousness is an adjective. So like you say, Devadatta is fat. Devadatta is the noun, fat is the adjective, Visheshanam. So here, Atma is noun.
I have ऐसे तो करको.
Please do keep your, what you call yourself muted, because whoever is talking is disturbing the others. Okay. So this, like you say Devadatta is fat. He says, this consciousness, it is not the nature of Atma, it's a property. And it's a generated property. Like when you have a candle, then a property is generated out of the candle when you light it, right? So when you light the candle, what happens? There are two inert materials. One is the wick of the candle and one is the flame. When one is the matchstick. When they come together, then the candle lights up, the fire lights up. So similarly, he says, in this Atma also, there are inert materials available, and when they combine, they generate consciousness. So we need to know a little bit about the Matam. This particular darshana enumerates 9 materials. So they are called dravyam. Dravyam is matter, a material. They are called dravyams in that Matam, and they enumerate 9 of them. 5 of them are the Panchabhutas. So 5 Panchabhutas. Then they say Kala, time, 6th one. Dik, the direction, 7th one. Atma, of course, the 8th one. And the mind, Manaha, the 9th one. So they enumerate 9 materials, matter. So remember, in the 9 materials, Atma and Mana also included. Therefore, Atma is inert and Mana is inert, because Dravyam means matter. Matter is inert, right? So you have five Panchabhutas: inert, time inert, direction inert, Atma inert, Manaha inert. So in Sanskrit, Panchabhutas, Kala, Dik, Atma, Manaha. Now they say that when two of these, not any two specific ones, which is the inert Atma and the inert Manaha, the inert mind, when they come together, when they are in contact, when they combine, consciousness is generated. And therefore it is called the Atma Mana Samyojaga Bodhaha. The Bodhaha, the consciousness generated by the Samyoga of Atmaha and Manaha. Atma Mana Samyoga Bodhaha. Ja meaning that born out of. Jati, born out of. So, Atma Mana Samyojaga Bodhaha. Okay. One more point which needs to be understood, as this consciousness is generated only when the inert Atma and the inert mind combine. Okay, I am talking about the Matam. Okay, the Vaisheshika Nayayaka Matam. So don't get confused. This is not the view of the Vedanta or the Advaita. So this Matam says only when these two combine, only when these two dravyams combine, Atma and Mana, then only can consciousness be generated. None of the other seven dravyams can generate consciousness. Okay. Now, and they say that whenever you say property, that property has to belong to some substance. Is it not? A property cannot exist without a corresponding substance. So if I say something is salty, some chips, banana chips are salty, let us say, then the chips is the substance and the saltiness is the property. If I if I say peda is sweet, peda is substance, sweetness is property. Therefore, whenever we are talking about consciousness, there has to be some property of the other. Okay, that is the idea. Now, remember we are saying there are two substances which are combining, Atma and Mana. Atma and mind are combining, and then the consciousness is generated. Now, when there are two dravyams, two entities involved, then the property which is generated cannot be a completely new one. It has to be latently present, I mean potentially present in one of those dravyams. So there are only two dravyams involved, Atma and Mana. Therefore, the Vaisheshika Matam says that when the consciousness is generated, it becomes the property of Atma, right? These two inert dravyams combining together create consciousness, a completely different property. But because of the logic that wherever there is a property, there has to be a substance, the Vaisheshika has to say that which of these two substances, Atma or Mana, the property of consciousness belongs to. And Vaisheshika says it is the property of Atma, because Atma is all-pervading, is very large, right? What about the mind? He says mind, of course, is necessary in the production of consciousness, because mind has to combine with Atma. But when consciousness is generated, the mind will not become sentient. It continues to be insentient. It is only Atma which becomes sentient. All these are the teachings of Vaisheshika. And they say, just like Atma is all-pervading, Vibhu, very large, mind is very minute, Anu. So in Vaisheshika Matam, Anu means atom. So mind is the size of Anu, the atom. And therefore, who will know the world? Manaha or Atma. Manaha continues to be insentient. And therefore, Atma, which has now acquired the property of consciousness, that Atma knows the world. And therefore, this Atma Manaha Sanyogaha, the joining, the combination of Atma and Manaha takes place where in Jagrada Avastha and Swapna Avastha. So Atma can be a knower. It will be active during these two avasthas. In Sushupti Avastha, Atma and Manaha do not combine. So there is Atma Mana Viyogam. In Jagrada and Swapna, there is Atma Mana Sanyogam or Samyogam. And in Sushupti Avastha, there is Atma Mana Viyogam, which means Atma and Mana are separated. And because there is separation, consciousness will not be there. And therefore, Atma will be inert, Jada, in Sushupti Avastha. And he says that is why in Sushupti you do not know the world. And therefore, the conclusion is that because of this Sambandha alone, because of this connection alone, Atma Mana connection alone, Atma becomes a Pramata, it becomes a knower. What is the advantage of this thinking over the previous Matam? The previous Matam, the Jnana Samuchaya, Karma Samuchaya said that Atma, the consciousness is a product. And therefore, whenever a product is there, the Karyam always, whenever we talk about Karyam, we always have to understand that Karanam undergoes a change to produce the Karyam. Therefore, in the Nyaya Vaisheshika Matam, that problem is not there. In the Jnana Karma Samuchaya Matam, because we are saying that consciousness is a product, it's a Karyam, you have to take it for granted that the Karanam Atma is undergoing a change. But in this Matam, in Nyaya Vaisheshika Matam, we are saying it is a property. And therefore, Atma does not undergo a change. Atma is free from action. Why? Because knowledge is an attribute, not an action. So Vaisheshika says that this consciousness principle which enables you to know the world, there is no action involved. It's an attribute only. And therefore, Atma remains as a changeless material. He gives an example. When you put a red paint on a pot, the pot gets a coating of the paint, but the pot does not change. It remains the same pot. This is the view of the Vaisheshika Mata. Okay. This is important to understand because this is what we are going to refute. So, any questions? This is Upanishad. You have all sort of arguments. Fine. I'll take it for granted there are no questions. So, Shankara says that even though you have very ingeniously said that Atma will not change because consciousness is not a product, it is a property. He says that it contradicts Shruti. By Brahman, if you say is matter, that contradicts Shruti. Because Shruti Virodha is a very major defect in this Matam also. Why? Because Nyaya Vaisheshika both are Astika Darshanam. They believe in the Shruti. They take the Shruti as Pramanam. Shankara says, attacks saying that you cannot say that Atma is inert because Shruti itself says Atma is consciousness principle itself. And he quotes Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which says Vijnanam Anandam Brahma. Brahma Vijnanaha is consciousness alone. And Acharya Upanishad also has Prajnanam Brahma. Brahma is consciousness alone. He quotes two and he says it is Shruti Virodha. You cannot put forward that argument because you, Nyaya Vaisheshika, are also Astika Darshanam. And therefore you are accepting the words of Shruti as true. You cannot put forward a particular view which contradicts the words of the Shruti. And he has quoted these two where they have said that Atma is or Brahman is conscious, is the consciousness principle. And what is the starting point of Vaisheshika? That Atma is Dravyam. So, Shruti Virodaha, it negates. Then he says not only that, you can negate using logic also. What is the logic? Two materials can combine only when they have got parts. What is a combination? One part comes into contact with another part. That is what is called a combination, right? For example, when I wear my t-shirt, the chest part of my body comes in contact with the inner part of the t-shirt. And Shankara says this, therefore, is possible. This connection, this sambandha of contacting is possible only when both the materials have got parts. Which is why we can never say that my hand contacts Akasha. Do we ever say my hand is in contact with space? Why don't we say? Because space has no parts. Instinctively, we don't use that particular expression. The hand cannot contact space because the hand is a part, but space has no parts. And Shankara says, by your own arguments, Vaisheshika, by your own arguments, you have said Atma is Vibhuhu, all pervading. An all pervading entity is infinite. An infinite entity cannot have parts. That is number one. Secondly, you have said the other component, mind, is Anuhu, smaller than an atom. And therefore, that Manaha also has no parts. So, Atma has no parts because it is infinite. Manaha has no part because it is extremely small. Neither of the dravyams have got parts. How can there be any sambandha? How can there be any connection at all? You are following the argument? Therefore, since there is no connection at all, the theory that Atma and Manaha, they combine and therefore consciousness is generated, that is not possible. Correct. Right? Now, supposing you use a hypothetical argument, we call it Abhyupeta Vadaha, an argument, suppositional argument. He says, no, no, no. Mind can come in contact with Atma. Even though you are saying one is large and one is small, even then I say, Vaisheshika, I say that no, mind can come in contact with Atma. What is the other argument? Can you guess? What is the nature of Atma? All pervading. So, when is a time when mind is not in contact with Atma?
Never.
Never. And therefore saying that, mind and at some point of time Atma will become conscious, another point of time Atma will not become conscious because there is no connection, that is not correct. It is Nitya Samyoga only. Always mind is in contact with the Atma because Atma is all pervading. And therefore Atma will always be the knower. However, your matam says what? During Sushupti Avastha, there is no contact and therefore Atma becomes inert. So logically also, your idea is impossible. And therefore, with this, he negates both the Jnana Karma Samuchaya and the Vaisheshika theory of knowledge. Okay. All right. I hope you have understood this correctly. There's another argument also which he uses. This is little technical. When Atma joins the mind, of course we are talking Vaisheshika Matam only, right? When Atma joins the mind, what happens? The mind gets connected to sense organs. The sense organs recognize sense objects. And that is how we say knowledge takes place. Right? This is the view of the Vaisheshika. When Atma joins the mind, at that point, consciousness is generated Atma becomes the knower, and then the mind is connected to sense organs. Sense organs are connected to the world, right? And therefore, the Atma, which is now knowing the world, how? Through this link. Atma knows through the mind, through the sense organs and sense objects. That is how the knowledge takes place. This is the theory of knowledge of Vaisheshika, right? And how is memory generated? This knowledge, it creates a vasana in the mind, an impression in the mind. Right? This is common knowledge. Like you see a flower which you have never seen before, that is pratyaksha jnanam. Then when the flower is gone away, the image of the flower remains in your mind because that pratyaksha jnanam, the perception, the direct perception, has created a memory in your mind. It's called a vasana, right? And now, according to the Vaisheshika Matam, this memory is generated when? When Atma comes in contact with the mind which has got this particular vasana, which was generated from Pratyaksha Jnanam, then memory is generated, right? And then comes the catch. This Matam says that direct perception and memory are never simultaneous. They are always sequential. So they say Pratyaksha Jnanam and Smriti Jnanam. Smriti Jnanam is memory, is always Kramena. Kramena is in sequence, right? First, Pratyaksham comes. That Pratyaksham creates a impression in the mind. Atma contacts the mind and memory comes. Therefore, memory is always sequentially after perception. And Shankara says that when you are saying this, it is illogical. Why? Shankara just leaves it at that. In Shankara Bhashyam, he simply says, you cannot explain memory coming sequentially by your logic. Shankara does not explain further. Luckily, we have sub-commentators called Tikakaras. So Tikakara explains, how does perception takes place? How does Pratyaksha take place? There is Atma and Manaha combined. Consciousness is generated. Then Manaha, through the Indriyas, through the sense organs, contact the sense objects, and therefore Pratyaksha Jnanam takes place. And when does memory come? So he says when Atma and mind, that mind which is containing this impression of the perception, the memory of the perception, when Atma combines with that mind, then memory takes place. Now what is the problem? Mind is always associated with the vasana, the samskara, right? Because perception has taken place, that impression is now in the mind. Mind is always associated with the vasana, right? Also, mind is always associated with indriya and vishaya. Therefore, pratyaksha and memory are always there. Because mind is associated with indriya vishaya, mind is associated with vasana. Pratyaksha is always there. Memory is always there. How can you say they come sequentially? Both will naturally happen simultaneously. So these are the arguments on which the Vaisheshika Matam is being dismissed. Okay, then this is all logic. Then some commentator comes back and says there is another Shruti Virodha, another contradiction with Shruti. And that I said is very important because the Vaisheshika Matam is Astika. It acknowledges Shruti as a Pramana. What is that contradiction? Vaisheshika says Atma gets consciousness, becomes a Pramata because of Sambandha with the mind. What does Shruti say about Atma? So many times we have seen this.
Satyam
It's-
Jnanam
it's-
Anantam Brahma.
It's the very Swarupam of Atma.
No, we're talking about the critical word is Sambandha. Atma gets consciousness because of Manasambandha, the connection with the mind.
Atma is asanga. It has no
Atma is
body.
asanga. Shruti has always said Atma is asanga. How can an asanga Atma have a sanga with anything? And you, Vaisheshika, are postulating that Atma is connecting to something. At the same time, you accept Shruti, which says that Atma cannot connect with anything because Atma is asanga. These are all contradictory ideas. And therefore, Shruti, Smriti, and Nyaya. Nyaya means logic. Contradictions are there in all three. And therefore, we are saying that your theory is also wrong. It has to be dismissed. Okay. Now, if you remember Tattva, we have talked about 5 features of consciousness. They are all drawn from this discussion. Not part, not property, not matter, independent principle. So since Tattva times we have been saying the 5 property, 5 property, 5 property, where did it come from? Not from the mind of any teacher. It is come purely from this kind of a discussion in this Shankaracharya discussion in this Bhashya. And Shankara adds, saying that when Atma is understood in this manner only, in what manner? As the witness, as the eternal witness, illumining the arrival and the departure of thoughts, which means what? Atma is understood as myself, the consciousness principle, the witness principle. Then only is Atma understood correctly, not otherwise. Okay, now 2 Astika matams, Astika darshanas, Jnana Karma Samuchaya and Vaisheshika have been dismissed. What about Nastikas? What is the major Nastika darshana?
Buddhism.
Buddhism. So Buddhism also has to be dealt with. For a proper understanding, we have to deal with Buddhism also. So Shankara takes up Buddhism. Buddhism, remember, is Nastika darshanam. Nastika, why? What is the definition of Nastika darshanam?
Doesn't believe in the Vedas.
Yes, doesn't accept Veda as a pramana, right? Now we will be discussing this in detail in probably some other Upanishads, but briefly, I think we've already discussed somewhere in the Gita also that Buddhists or the Bodha Darshanam as they call it, has got 4 different groups, 4 different subdivisions: Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Yogachara, and Madhyamika. Okay, the details we'll not discuss today. Some other occasion I will tell you more about these 4. And in fact, these 4 are divided into that 2, the Hina and the other one. Okay, the major and the minor classes also. But we will not deal there. So we will now look at this 3rd one called Yogachara. Why does Shankara deal with Yogachara? Because Yogachara also says Jagat, the world is Mithya, and the observer consciousness is Satyam. It's very similar to Vedanta. Right? What does Vedanta say? Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya. Observer consciousness is Satyam and world is Mithya. Right? Now, what is the difference? The Yogachara says that consciousness is Shanikam, is momentary only. What do we say? We say Brahman is eternal. Remember, this is the major difference. Otherwise, they are very, very similar. Jagan Mithya, Brahma Satyam is the idea of Yogachara as well as of Vedanta. But Vedanta talks about Brahman as eternal and Yogachara talks about the consciousness principle as Shanikam, momentary only. So for Yogachara, consciousness exists only for a moment, for a Shani. So then they also have another stipulation in their matam. They say that consciousness can be known only by consciousness. The consciousness knows itself. Therefore, consciousness is both the subject and the object. This is called swasamvedita vadaha. Okay, the consciousness knows itself. That is what Acharya says. At the same time, it says consciousness is shanikam. Right? What is the problem with that? Because consciousness is momentary, what happens? Consciousness arises and goes away. Then a second consciousness arises and goes away. The third consciousness arises and goes away. All instantly, because they are all shanikam, they are all momentary only. So this itself, is in contradiction with their statement that consciousness is to be known by consciousness. Why? Because the consciousness of the second movement, second shanikam, cannot possibly know the consciousness of the first shanikam. Why? Because pratyaksha pramanam can observe only the present. You can only infer the future and the past. And therefore, the consciousness of any movement can observe the consciousness only of that moment. In the second moment, the first momentary consciousness is no longer there because it is gone, because it was shanikam. Therefore, a new consciousness of the second moment is existing, which means there is no continuity of consciousness. And to be aware of the past, what has to happen? Consciousness of the past has to be the same as consciousness of the present. Then only I would have observed the past and I can say, yes, there was a past in this present moment. Is it not? When you say that yesterday I went somewhere, you were there yesterday, you were there today. That is why you can say that I went there. But if the consciousness of yesterday had been somebody else, then there is no way that today's consciousness can know that you went to McDonald's yesterday. Right? Therefore, consciousness having a momentary existence means that perception can prove only momentary consciousness. And that is what this darshanam is called, also called Shanika Vijnana Darshanam. Right? You are not a jiva continuously. You are a series of individual momentary jivas. That is the darshanam. That, and they give the example of going to the Ganga and taking a bath. So you think that you are taking a bath in the Ganga for 20 minutes. But they say the water which is touching your body is not the same water as that which touched your body in the last second, because there is a constant flow of the river. That is the example. And yet you say that I had a bath, the Ganga. So therefore, when you say I am a jiva, they say you are not really a continuous jiva, you are a series of jivas. Right? And because of this, what happens? Consciousness principle itself, which, what are we discussing? Pratibodha viditam. Pratibodha viditam matam, that itself is self-revealing, but momentary. And so this Buddhism says the meaning of Pratibodha viditam basically is that consciousness reveals itself through a series of observations. Right? Now, what is the catch? The same thing that I talked about. That subject and object can never be the same. If you have to remember, unless subject and object are the same, you cannot remember the past. If the last consciousness, which is the subject, which is the object, is different from the current consciousness, which is the subject, the last consciousness is not available to me to see. And therefore, this consciousness is revealing itself through a series of operations. That is not possible at all. It's like the camera can never capture itself in the photograph. The subject and the object can never be the same. That rule is called kartri karma virodha dosha in Sanskrit. Kartri karma. The doer and the done, there is a contradiction. And therefore he says this particular vadaha, the view of the Buddha or the Buddhist is tainted by this kartri karma virodha dosha. And there is, of course, there is one exception. What is the exception? When something has several parts, one part can become the subject and the other part can become the object. So when I am shaving, my hand is the subject, but my chin is the object. So when I say I am touching myself, that is possible because I have several parts. But consciousness has no parts because you accept, right? Now, the problem is that we are saying consciousness has no parts. Then, the Buddhist may say that in Upanishads, there are many statements. Atma should be seen by Atma. Atma should be known by Atma. If consciousness has no parts, how come that Shastram talks about Atma? Right? For example, since all of you have done Bhagavad Gita, in the 10th chapter, there is a line. Swayam evatmanatmanam vethatam tvam purushottama. Swayam eva atmana atmanam vethatvam. Know yourself through yourself. Is there not a contradiction? Right? And there is one Shruti Vakyam also, which we have not done, which we'll do sooner or later in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It says, Atmanyev Atmanam Pashyati. Atmanyev Atmanam Pashyati. The Atma is seen by the Atma itself. Okay. How is this reconciling with your idea, your statement that Atma has no parts? So there is no Kartri Karma Virodha at all. That is what this Buddhist says. What is the answer? Shankara gives the answer. Normally, when you say Atma, it means Atma which is Nirupadhika. Nirupadhika means what?
No Upadhi, no RM, no.
No RM, right? Atma not associated with RM. In our language, what is it?
OC.
OC. So Atma not associated with any RM is OC. Shankara says normally in Shruti you can take Atma as OC, but when there are other statements, for example in Vyavaharika, Atma is associated with the Sariratrayam and therefore it is RC, but because of its close intimacy, Sariratrayam is also called I. The Atma in association with the mind is also taken as I. The RC is also taken as I. So in Shruti, you will find the usage is such that there are two ways in which the word I or the word Atma is used. One is Nirupadhika Atma, pure Atma, not associated with any RM. One is Sopadhika Atma, Atma associated with an RM, which is RC. Now, the Sopadhika Atma associated with the RM, the RC, does it have parts?
Yes.
Yes.
What are the parts?
It's the body, mind.
So we are talking about RC. So let's talk about
Oh,
the
okay.
body. What are the parts? What is the
Vishwa Tejasa
What is the definition of RC?
RM plus OC.
RM plus OC, two parts, right? So RC has parts. One is the conscious part, the OC. One is the inert part, the RM. And therefore he says, definitely, Shankara says, definitely one part can be the knower of the other part. Therefore, when you say that Sakshi Chaitanyam illuminates the mind, you are saying Atma, the OC, is illuminating the RC mind. Similarly, when I say I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, that thought is where it is in the RC. But thought can be generated only by the RC, right? Because thought means mind, mind means RC. But through that Aham Brahmasmi vritti, which is occurring in the mind, of course, your RC, what are you recognizing? You are recognizing yourself as the OC. And therefore, one part can always recognize the other part. It is necessary for the RC to be there, because only through the RC you can recognize that you are the OC by making the statement Aham Brahma Asmi. And so he says, therefore, when you take the Sopadhiga Atma, the Atma in association with RM, there is no Kartri Karma Virodha, that is correct. But what about Nirupadhika Atma? That Nirupadhika Atma, by very nature, Nirupadi, no upadhis. It has got no upadhis at all. There is no reflecting medium. In that OC, the Atma knowing itself is not possible. And of course, you can add Atma acting as subject and object is also not possible, because something other than the Atma cannot know Atma. Only Atma can know itself. When you say Atma can know itself, you are talking about RC and OC. When you are talking only about OC, there is no question of knowledge at all. He gives an example. Just as light does not need another light to illuminate, by meaning that a self-effulgent entity need not be illuminated by anything else. And similarly, Atma does not need any other source to know itself. Why all this argument? Because in the Buddhist philosophy, the Atma consciousness, Atma itself, is Shanikam. And there is absence of permanent Atma, and therefore there will be Shruti Virodha, right? But why? Because for Atma Chaitanyam, there can be no break. If you are saying Shanikam is there, you are saying there is Atma coming up at every moment, which means there is the moment between the moment when there is no consciousness, and that is not correct, because Mundaka we saw Nityam Vibhum Sarvagatam. Consciousness is all pervading, consciousness is eternal. Therefore, the word Nityam, it contradicts Shanikam, right? This is, remember, this argument is for our consumption. You cannot give this argument to a Buddhist. Why?
He doesn't believe in the Veda statements.
He doesn't accept the Veda as Pramanam. So if you tell him that Mundaka says Nityam Vibhum Sarvagatam, he'll say, so what? I don't accept the Veda. Right? Now, when we come to Brahma Sutras, finally, there is a negation of Buddhist view, which contains several arguments. Okay. But we don't want to get into that right now. Brahma Sutra is far away. So let us take only one of those arguments. What is the argument which Shankara gives? Supposing you are the Jivatma, and according to your Buddhist theory, Jivatma lives for a moment only, Shanikam, right? And by doing varieties of sadhana, you are going to get moksha. The question is, why should you work for moksha? What is the logic?
The phalam of that sadhana will also be shanika and will not carry over to the next
To put in
consciousness.
other words, if you as a Shanika Jivatma are working for moksha, remember it is Shanikam. Working for moksha means what? Moksha comes later. So when moksha comes, it is another moment. You are not there because you are Shanika. So you're working for something which you will never get, because by the time it comes, you would have gone. And therefore, Buddhism is also dismissed. Okay. Just one more point. This pratibodha has got different interpretations. So some people, they say pratibodha means intuitive cognition, right? So it's called nirnimitta bodha. Nimittam means there is a cause. Nirnimittam means there is no cause. What are the normal causes for knowledge? Pratyaksham, anumanam. So nirnimittam means there is no pratyaksham, there is no anumanam, and the knowledge has just arisen without any pramanam at all, neither pratyaksha pramanam nor anumana pramanam, and therefore it is intuitive cognition, right? And a lot of people, and a lot of including yogis, they talk about this in Samadhi, that Brahman is known through this nirnimitta bodha, intuitive cognitions. So, just like a Sushupti Avastha, we have two perceptions. What are they? One is bliss and one is ignorance. So in Sushupti Avastha, when you get up, you can say, I slept well, Ananda, and I did not know anything, Ajnanam. Now, for this knowledge that I slept well and I did not know anything, what is the pramanam? There is no pramanam, because your mind, which made you pramata, was not available at Sushupti Avastha, but yet the knowledge is there. So no pramanam has been used. Pramata himself was not there, yet you know that I slept well, right? This knowledge, which is not dependent upon any pramanam, is called nirnimitta bodha, intuitive cognition. So this is one interpretation given to pratibodha by some people. They say it is intuitive only. And there are some people who say that pratibodha is the final self-knowledge. It occurs only one, right? So these people say that for a jnani, when he gets videha mukti, this pratibodha matam takes place. Atma jnanam happens in a flash as he is getting videha mukti. And in that flash, the knowledge comes, destroys all karma, sanchita, agami, prarabdha, and is instantly followed by videha mukti. This flash of realization is called pratibodha. Right? So this is the second view. And Shankara comments on these two views. The names of these views, incidentally, are not known. When Shankara has not mentioned that, but there is no way that we can know it. Shankara says that whichever way you interpret, whether the knowledge has come through pramanam or not, right? Or whether the knowledge has come only once or is continuous knowledge. What is that? Pratibodha is that only, that consciousness available in every thought. And Brahman is that consciousness, and that is important. Whether it has come once or not, whether it has come with pramanam or not, it doesn't matter. What is important is that ultimately the final takeaway from this verse is that consciousness available in every thought, that consciousness alone is Brahman. That is the takeaway. So with this, I'll stop for today. Any questions? Very, very long, involved discussion. But as I said, this is one of the most critical verses of the Upanishad. I hope you have liked it.
Om sir. So three opposing arguments have been dismissed.
Yes.
starting with
Actually, 5. The last 2 we didn't have names for, so it's okay.
Yeah. So Bhartra Prapancha, then the second,
Kannada.
yes, Kannada Rishis, and then the third one, the Buddhist.
Yeah. And the other 2 names we don't know, nor do we know the originators.
Yes. Yes.
It's important to understand why we are, taking up these opposing darshanas, Purvapakshis. Why is it necessary to take up this in a discussion?
To strengthen our view of Advaita.
Yeah.
Mm.
Remember that traditionally, in traditional thought, traditional teaching, first the Purvapakshi is taken up, discussed, dismissed,
Right.
and then the Siddhanti is done. We are not following that, but that is how it is usually done. That's because first you lay the foundation by dismissing every other, viewpoint, and then you lay your own foundation. So with
Yes.
this, we'll stop for today. Thank you for your patience. Om Purnamada Purnamidam
Purnamidam Purnamidam
Purnamada Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Shanti.